Good afternoon and welcome to another installment of the WARF Essential Topics series. My name is Laura Heisler and I am Director of Programming for WARF, or the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. And we are delighted to bring you this series from time to time on topics that matter to the UW-Madison community and the broader community related primarily to issues affecting technology commercialization and intellectual property. This spring, we've been putting together a short series within a series focused on career opportunities for students and emerging researchers to put their degree to work and to think about careers and tools that will define the rest of what they do with their STEM degree. Today is part 2 of this 3-part mini-series, and it's on a subject near and dear to our hearts at WARF related to careers in intellectual property and technology commercialization. Before I move on to introduce today's fantastic moderator and our star-studded panel, I want to draw your attention to our final installment in this 3-part series, which will take place on March 25th, focused on careers and opportunities in social impact. And we also have a fantastic panel pulled together for that session. So it'll be at the same time, 4 o'clock on March 25th. Before we get started, I also want to take a moment to invite you to join me in reflecting on the land that UW-Madison and WARF occupy. This land is ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejope since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state governments repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. And today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. Thank you for appreciating this with us as we go into today's session. With that, I am going to turn things over to my colleague, Justin Anderson, Senior IP Manager at WARF, who'll be moderating today's session and introducing our panel. Justin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Laura, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored and excited to have the pleasure of moderating this panel of professionals and students as they share their experiences in taking their STEM educations down very different roads in academia, industry, new ventures, and law. These emerging experts will share their experiences working to advance innovations and will talk about ways to build your technology commercialization experience while pursuing your STEM degree. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Up first is Carly Conway. Carly is Intellectual Property Counsel at Exact Sciences in Madison, Wisconsin. Prior to joining Exact, she was an IP litigator at Quarles and Brady in Madison and Venable in Washington, D.C. Before law school, Carly was a research fellow in the medical genetics branch of the National Human Genome Research Institute at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Carly earned a JD from Harvard Law and BS in biology and a BA in English from Washington and Lee University. Welcome, Carly. Up next is Katherine Schultz. Katherine is a patent scientist at the law firm Quarles and Brady in Madison, Wisconsin. She helps prepare and prosecute patents related to molecular biology. Katherine received her PhD from the Department of Biomolecular Chemistry at UW-Madison. As a graduate student, she studied chromatin remodeling in the developing Drosophila embryo in Melissa Harrison's lab. While pursuing her graduate degree, she was also a WARF student ambassador. Welcome, Katherine. Up next is Zack Ellis. Zack is the Managing Director of New Ventures at Rev1 Ventures in Columbus, Ohio. He leads venture acceleration by working with industry and community partners, while also serving as an advisor to Rev1's corporate innovation partners. He has a deep and diversified background in tech commercialization, corporate innovation, and strategic leadership, with roles at Pepsi, Co., The Ohio State University, and WARF. Zack earned an MS in biotechnology from UW-Madison, an MBA from Pepperdine University, and a BS in science and engineering from the United States Naval Academy. Prior to his career in business, Zack served 7 years as an active duty officer in the United States Navy. Welcome, Zack. And last but not least is Jessica Perrault. Jessica is a third-year PhD candidate in the Molecular and Environmental Toxicology program at UW-Madison. Her research focuses on the genetic regulation of the aryl hydrocarbon receptor pathway, which regulates the toxicity of many environmental contaminants, most famously dioxin, and is indicated in diseases from cancer to developmental defects. Prior to her graduate studies, Jess earned her BS in genetics from Iowa State University. She is an active WARF student ambassador, and upon completion of her PhD, she plans to pursue a career outside of academia. Welcome, Jessica, and welcome again to all of our panelists. And thanks again for taking the time to share your experiences and expertise and wisdom with the audience. And why don't we just dive right in with the first question here. Jessica, do you have any advice on gaining relevant IP experience while in school?
Yeah, that's a great question, Justin. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I've kind of focused on so far is really staying curious. UW is it's a big campus, right? And it has a lot of different resources that you can tap into. You know, I've been fortunate to kind of get into a lot of different student groups and organizations and programs on campus, which I'll get into a little bit later. But I think, like you said, I'm an active WARF ambassador. So that's been a really neat opportunity to really kind of work with all you guys at WARF and kind of see, you know, what does tech transfer look like? What does a career in intellectual property look like? And I've also, through WARF, been fortunate enough to experience the Varsity Venture Studio. So that's been a really eye-opening experience of actually taking an idea and kind of going through, you know, how do you take that to hopefully a business or, you know, doing something with that and kind of really getting that hands-on experience.
Thank you, Jessica. Katherine, do you have anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the biggest message I'd like to say here is leave your lab. Like, it's really hard sometimes to just take the time to tell your boss, hey, I need to go do other things sometimes. But for me, it really paid off, particularly being a WARF ambassador, like Jessica talked about. I think it's a really low commitment way to learn if you're interested in IP, and to also just have something to put on your resume to say that you've taken an interest, you've stepped out of the box to learn more about it. And a couple other things I'd recommend is look into auditing classes in areas you're interested in. Like, I audited an intro to IP class that just made me that much more comfortable trying to talk to attorneys in my interviews about IP. And when you're in school, you can take these amazing courses for free that you may never have a chance to take again. So take advantage of it while you can. And I think the other big thing that I never did and wish I had was to do the mortgage entrepreneurial boot camp, because people rave about that.
Thank you very much, Katherine. And Jessica, those were really, really great comments about what you can do while you're still here on campus. Carly, reflecting back on your time in school, what did you do to gain IP experience?
Yeah, I think I'd start by challenging the notion of what you consider to be relevant. There's going to be a lot of momentum towards specialization when you're in school, and once you enter your career as well. To Jessica's point about staying curious, and Katherine mentioned stepping out of the box. I think that's so important, because you definitely have to work to develop your expertise in a particular area. But staying curious, keeping your eyes open is so important. And so when you're diving in to learn about your own area of expertise, figure out how you can build up a full slate of skills. And for me, that meant sort of seeking out projects once I started doing internships that were adjacent to what I was interested in, but maybe a little bit different. And while you're still in school, just like Katherine mentioned, if you can take courses, even if you're just auditing them, that expand that horizon, I think it's so helpful. Just the notion of always continuing to learn, and once you're out of school, like still going to talks and conferences and checking in with people in your network to see what they're working on. Just keeping that curiosity is so important.
Yeah, you all bring up some really, really great themes there, and I do think we are in a time where it's very much it's kind of IP and venture and entrepreneurship. They're all permeating, I think, around us and are far more present than when I was in school. And these things seem to be a little bit more on the fringes or more highly specialized. So those are all great comments about staying curious and not being afraid to kind of step outside your traditional role as a grad student or a scientist, because these opportunities are available, and as was pointed out, many of them are free, and so certainly do explore and build out your network. Kind of shifting gears here a little bit, Zach, I was curious if you could give us some insight as to what motivated you to pursue opportunities and experiences outside of what's traditionally considered to be maybe a STEM career.
Yeah, for me, I think I was kind of thrown into a career or career field where, STEM was more applied in a completely different context where your specific major mattered less and just understanding of STEM mattered more. So my career began in the military. And so, an understanding of mechanical engineering or electrical engineering was more relevant to how you fly a plane or operate an engine room on a warship, or how the radar system on a missile works, than it was sitting down to actually work out an equation and figure it out yourself, right? So I think in that regard, I always looked at the sciences as a tool that I then use in a career as opposed to it being the career itself. And as I transitioned out of the military and got into corporate America and ultimately into venture capital, I sort of identified the career field I wanted to go into first, that being tech commercialization and venture capital, and was lucky enough to have a mentor who suggested to me that going deeper into STEM would be a way to differentiate myself and accelerate my career in a way that would help me stand out apart from people who just kind of specialized in finance, if you will. And so I've been able to work in lots of different areas where my STEM knowledge has been applicable, whether it be renewable plastics or biofuels or solar panels or food and agriculture.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I really appreciate those points you brought up about this transition we're kind of seeing from being more applied to, really getting into the nuts and bolts of processes and systems and that sort of thing, to, leveraging those skills and the way you maybe view problems and problem solve and applying those to things like law and venture. You also brought up a really interesting point, I thought, as well. And I might turn to the other panelists. Perhaps Jessica can maybe shed some light on this too. And this idea of when you are, deeply involved in a research project, is there a moment or an experience that you have that causes you to maybe transition and start thinking about things a little bit differently?
Yeah, I think there are definitely times when you're working on a project, right? You sort of have this preconceived assumption of like, oh, this is what we think is going to happen, and we did these experiments, and sometimes you get something that's wildly different than you thought it was going to be, and it's a good moment to sort of take a step back and say like, oh, this is not what I expected at all. This is very different. And I kind of love those moments, right? Because they're not what you expect, but they're almost better because of it, because it's something that's totally like, oh, cool, like, why did this happen? And you have a whole sort of another track to go down. And I don't know, that's part of the reason why I love science, right? Is like there are unexpected things and there are all of these unknowns that really sort of keep pushing you forward and keep, coming back to that stay curious part, kind of pursuing your curiosity and getting to go after those things, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. That is really great. And as you said, I think it's this natural curiosity we all have as scientists to, keep pushing and keep exploring. Another thing that was brought up by Zack that I do want to kind of pull more out of, and maybe Carly, you can add on to this a little bit, in terms of, mentorship and identifying maybe people within your network to help you kind of on the path. What advice would you give to someone for doing that?
Yeah. For me personally, I think mentorship comes from many different places. So obviously in a PhD program, kind of your principal investigator or PI is sort of a built-in mentor scientifically. But there are other mentors that you can kind of, sometimes you just sort of bump into them and it's kind of like, oh, hey, like you're doing something that I want to do. And you kind of just start a conversation with them. And that's kind of been a valuable experience for me, is just sort of the serendipitous relationships that sort of spring out mentorship wise.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jessica, I totally agree with that. I think if you keep your eyes out for people who have skills you want to acquire or whose careers you admire, and that you also have the opportunity to get that face-to-face time so that you can develop something of a relationship, it's so important to follow up. I think as a potential mentee, the onus is on you to make it as easy as possible for that person to help you. Like, have a very specific ask, get a little bit of their time and have all the details planned out so that all they need to say is yes. Because a lot of these times, the people who are really valuable mentors are really busy people. And so if you can say, hey, once the world reopens, I'd love to meet you for coffee for 30 minutes. If you have time, here, I'm available these days. Or, now we do everything by Zoom. That's another way to do it in the interim. I think taking that lead, if they don't have time, they'll tell you, but just reaching out, making those touch points can be really helpful.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many important connections you make and how much a mentor can really mean in this area in particular. I know, speaking from my own personal experience, knowing very little about intellectual property before I actually, made the leap from engineering into technology management, it was really mentorship that kind of helped me along the way as I, kind of got my feet under me and some more practical experience. And so I think, like Carly said, and like Jessica said, don't hesitate to reach out to people that you want to, draw information out of, or have them be there for you to get some practical guidance and to really understand, what the profession is all about and what things may advantage you as you're trying to distinguish yourself in this career path. So I guess now, kind of transitioning a little bit now more to the idea of networking then. We are, of course, in strange and challenging times when it relates to getting face-to-face with people. But maybe going back to Zack, how would you go about maybe recommending building your network during this time and maybe hopefully come fall when we can actually get back out and meeting with people?
Yeah. What's worked best for me when it comes to networking is being fairly targeted and who I want to connect with and why. I think early in your career, you're told to network and meet people, and it's not what you know, but who you know. And so you go around adding people constantly on LinkedIn and asking for business cards everywhere you go. But ultimately what happens is, not a lot of fruit comes out of those because you don't build a relationship, you don't contact them, you don't follow up, or when you do reach out, maybe it's a very one-sided conversation. And so to make the best use of your time in an impactful way, I think the best strategy, or at least the strategy that's worked for me, is being very targeted. And so once I knew I wanted to be in venture capital, I reached out to people who were within 1 to 2 degrees of me, whether, initially it was geographically and scientifically, and then just slowly expanding out from there. And, I think it's important to try to have, something in common so you can build a relationship such that there's something for you to share and something for you to get, as opposed to you just taking from other folks. And in this day and age, with tools, not just like LinkedIn, but Twitter and Clubhouse and everything else that's available, it's easier than ever to find people who are experts in a certain area and just begin to follow them and either digest what they're sharing or find a way to reach out. That said, there's also a flood of people claiming to be experts that you might need to be careful about, but that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you really kind of picked up on a couple of follow-up questions I had regarding, and maybe other panelists want to weigh in too on their use of tools like LinkedIn, and if there's any, maybe one or two liners on, pros and cons versus going that approach. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think for me, I haven't used much by way of social platforms to try to network. I think there's really two areas where I've tried to grow my professional network. And one is sort of what Zack was saying, that you really need to build this relationship. And so one great place to look is just, you already have a network that grew organically out of the relationships that you already have. So it's important to stay in touch with people. You'll have former classmates or former colleagues, even friends and relatives who might end up in a place where they can help you in some way. And because you already have that pre-existing relationship, they're likely to do so. You're likely to get some fruit out of that, in addition to the substantive relationship that you already enjoy with them. But as far as traditional networking goes, I've found same principle where you're trying to build a relationship, and one way of doing that is frequency. And so if you're going to the same, say, conferences every year, go to the social portions once that happens again in real life. You'll start seeing the same familiar faces over and over again. You're all there for a common purpose. And so it's easier, to make that entry point, to make that introduction. And same with local industry organizations. If you can join an organization that does have frequent events, you'll start seeing the same people over and over again. You can introduce yourself, start building that relationship. And that's one way that's a little less painful than cold calling, in my opinion.
I'll jump in quickly. I think meeting people in person is still it's unfortunately really important still. I hated hearing that as a grad student. I just made myself try to go to networking events. And I think back to like our first question, like the more you can do while you're in school, like being a WARF ambassador, taking classes, you can attend events like Madison Women in IP, whatever you can do to start talking to people in an area that you're interested in and have like some face name recognition, ask people for informational interviews. Like the more you can do that, the better. It's sad and it's hard to hear probably for most of you introverts, but it's just how it is. Like I really appreciated being a WARF ambassador because that is the connection that got me a job immediately after grad school, and it's the job that I still have. And you just have to step out of your box, even if you'd rather just go quietly read by yourself sometimes.
Oh, that's a great point, Katherine. And yeah, I can attest. It is certainly sometimes a challenge to kind of put yourself out there. But as was mentioned, I think there's nothing quite like that face-to-face organic connection you make with somebody, as well as just, having those kind of bonds that go back to maybe a shared experience in grad school or at some social event. So those are really important. And I just want to throw it over to Zack for a follow-up.
Yeah, if I could add one pro tip to reaching out and networking, particularly as a student, especially as a student, is that, do it now, get started, build that muscle, get your reps in, because everybody loves helping students. If you reach out and say, hi, I'm a student at UW-Madison, blah, blah, blah. Hi, I'm a student at Harvard Law, blah, blah, blah. Hi, I'm a student at the Naval Academy, blah, blah, blah. Would you mind? People will bend over backwards to connect and help out and lend advice to the extent they can. But the moment you graduate, You're considered a professional, you should know better, and like things just kind of change. It's a little bit harder to get on people's calendars, like reactions are a little bit colder, and so then it's even more important to be able to have the type of skills that allow you to build a relationship with someone. So if you want to get risk-free practice, do it as a student and be sure to emphasize, hi, I'm a student, I'd love to XYZ.
Fantastic advice, Zach, and I may take you up on that because I'll be graduating here in May, so I guess I better get on your calendar soon. Jessica, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quick, kind of a story going through this. Well, I guess first off, I agree with absolutely everything Zach said. As a student, it definitely helps, especially from UW. If you say, hey, I'm a graduate student from UW, at least in my experience, people have been really receptive to that. But I just wanted to share, so the way that I actually got my WARF ambassador position, so I just started this past October, so kind of still in the COVID window of not being able to meet in person and not really having that face-to-face contact. And what I did actually is I just, like, I knew about WARF, I had heard about it, I thought intellectual property was kind of a really interesting area, and I wanted to know more. And so I actually called WARF's HR and asked, like, hey, do you have any internships? Do you have, you know, a position for a grad student or just something, anything that I could like get more information and more experience at WARF. And the woman at HR actually said, oh, hey, we have an entire program. It's called the WARF Ambassador Program. I'll send your name over to the person that runs that. And then I kind of, got bounced around and eventually ended up talking to Beth and did an interview with her. And that's how I got my WARF ambassador position. So yeah, I mean, really, if you like take the initiative and you just give it a shot. I mean, even if you're like, oh, there's no way this is going to work, or there's no way they're going to get back to me or whatever, just try it. You never know what's going to happen.
That's right. Yeah, thank you for that. And as you said, I mean, I think playing up those alumni ties as well always seem to, form a natural connection. Just one quick follow-up on that too. As was mentioned, professional organizations are a great way to expand your network and to kind of get a better understanding, I think, of certain industries. One in particular that we at WARF are a big part of is AUTUM, which is the Association of University Technology Managers, a real mouthful. But they have a bunch of resources on their website and are often, the first place I point people to when it comes to looking for opportunities in this area. If you are just finishing graduate school or you're finishing your studies, so I would, highly recommend looking at AUTUM. And they also have some unique opportunities too if you're looking for internships and that sort of thing. So it is just a great resource, and other organizations as well. I would certainly encourage looking into those. So transitioning a little bit here, kind of back to more of, using our technical skills and backgrounds, I was hoping maybe Katherine can start us off with a little bit of maybe allaying people's concerns that, I've spent all of this time getting my PhD or my degree. Is it all just for nothing, or are you actually using your technical skills on a day-to-day basis?
It is not for nothing. My one of the attorneys I work for reminds me of this like every day. But so as a patent agent, a big part of what you do is you just take people's science manuscripts, maybe even just informal science write-ups, and you try to pick out something inventive in them, and you work with them, and you really have to understand the technology to do a good job. That being said, depending on who you work for and what work you're given, sometimes the science is very much in your comfort zone, and sometimes it is far from your comfort zone. But in either of those cases, I think it's interesting to like look back and realize how much you still couldn't do it without having gone through grad school, because grad school teaches you how to research topics online. It gives you this understanding of science fundamentals that is just kind of like second nature. And it gets you comfortable just picking up and reading science papers. But it's really nice when the work is in your wheelhouse, because then you can get into the weeds with the inventors. And inventors often really appreciate that. They're sort of relieved that they are talking to someone who speaks their language. And if you can let them know that this is your background, you understand these concepts, it's a lot easier to explain genetic engineering when someone knows the central dogma of gene expression than when they don't. And it can make for a much better patent and just more fun and happier clients.
Yes, thank you, Katherine. And I think, like you said, it's this kind of translation that we do in IP law in particular, where you're basically converting something from scientific language into legalese, which is certainly a skill that's definitely required. So thank you for that. Carly, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think this underlying theme, I use my technical background in pretty much every aspect of my role, and it is not nearly as impressive as my fellow panelists' technical backgrounds. But I do think that having that sort of general level of literacy in technical documents, like Katherine was saying, is so important because, especially if you go into law, most lawyers aren't going to have any type of technical background. And so it becomes intimidating to them when they see a technical document or a patent or something, they sort of shut down and they shove it over to you. And so you do become this important bridge between legal and, for me now in-house, R&D. Just like Katherine was saying, for invention disclosure intake, it's helpful if you understand at least some fundamentals, even if it's not on all fours with your background, just to be able to understand what's going on and, to be able to take the time to get up to speed to understand something that's more complex or outside of your area. So pretty much everything that I do, whether I'm reviewing an abstract or a manuscript that's going to go out for publication and I have to pull back something that's trade secret or something that we haven't filed a patent on yet, I need to understand what's in there in order to be able to make those determinations. So definitely that general literacy, and as Katherine was saying, the more specialized you get, the more you've gone through grad school, I'm sure it becomes even more relevant. If you do find something that falls within your area, it must be very exciting to get in there and really understand it off the bat. That would be a huge advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for that. And I can say, yes, when you have someone that's speaking the language, if you will, as a client, it certainly is a relief that you can basically entrust your prized invention to someone else and they're actually going to understand it. And you don't need to spend copious amounts of time re-educating them or starting from scratch. So thank you both for that. Zack, do you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, one more point to add. I mean, can't emphasize enough for everyone to follow your curiosities, because you will find that there are STEM applications in almost every field. Even at PepsiCo, I mean, the people who design, water bottles and drink cartons, I mean, they're all, mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, et cetera, et cetera. So there's always a place to apply your skills in venture capital, especially for someone like me who focuses, very heavily in the hard sciences. Having that technical background is really key to understanding new things that are being introduced, whether it's new foods, new ingredients, new advanced materials, you name it. And oftentimes what could make or break an investment opportunity is the depth and sophistication of its patent estate and how well protected the IP and the knowledge, the technical base of a company is. So follow your curiosities, because I'm sure you'll find application somewhere interesting.
Yeah, thank you. And that's just great advice and a nice segue, I think, into the next kind of line of questioning, which really kind of gets more to, how you really go about breaking into this industry, if you will, be it law, be it venture, be it entrepreneurship. We talked a lot about building your network, looking for mentors, that sort of thing. But really when it comes down to it, of course, you have to differentiate yourself and maybe overcome some obstacles. So I just wanted to open it up to the group if you want to share any kind of anecdotes or advice on, really kind of getting in the door, getting that first opportunity in your career path.
Well, I'll kick off since I'm not on mute. Breaking into venture is a very opaque sort of path, right? There's no one way. I mean, many people are entrepreneurs first, some are scientists first, some are physicians first, some are Wall Street types first, and it varies greatly and widely. So but I would say there's been no better time to attempt to break in than right now, because the industry is really growing. And there are programs and boot camps and educational resources everywhere about how to understand what's happening in the venture capital space. And there's a lot of initiatives out there to be more inclusive to people who may have different backgrounds. But that said, it's still highly competitive because lots of people want to get in. And so, for me, having a scientific background really helped me stand out when I weighed the opportunity cost of getting a second graduate degree to do this. I looked around at some of the people's resumes I was impressed by who were working in the space, and many of them had 2-3 graduate degrees. So I said, well, I guess I better go ahead and do what I have to do, and it's paid off tremendously.
Thank you, Zach. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I can't echo what Zach said enough. I mean, having this background in STEM is already the huge leg up that you need to get your foot in the door. For me, so I was applying to law school in 2009, which was a little bit of a rough time to do anything. But at the time, patent law was a growing field. There weren't a lot of attorneys with science backgrounds. And a lot of the IP groups, the firms that I looked at, were staffed with people without technical backgrounds who were just doing their best to try to get up to speed with what they had. And so it was a huge advantage, both when I was applying to law schools and then as I was looking for positions after law school, just to have that science background. It already put me in a position where, I was needed in a way that people with philosophy majors in college, not to denigrate that, that's fine. But, once you have that STEM background, there are a lot of positions in areas where STEM is not the common path through, where you already have that leg up. And so exploring that is a good first step for anything.
Yeah, that is a fantastic point. I mean, as a current law student and a patent agent, you think about actual options and those that can actually sit or are eligible for the patent bar, and it is a limited subset of individuals that have technical backgrounds and technical degrees. And so, as was mentioned, this is a real differentiator when it comes to definitely the legal profession. And when you're looking at kind of growth in that industry, in the legal industry in particular, there's immense growth and demand for attorneys in technology transactions and licensing, patent prosecution, patent litigation, whereas other areas are, really kind of seem to be contracting. Certainly, I think bankruptcy law is probably back on the uptick, but, I think in all seriousness, having a technical background in law, not only does it just separate you from what you can actually do in your practice, but it also, I think, presents you a different way of looking at issues and problems that your contemporaries in your classes may not, view things the same way as you do, which is nice to have a little different perspective from time to time. Jessica or Katherine, do you have anything to add on this?
I'll chime in. I just want to say to the PhD students out there who are like me and thought it seemed really wrong to just go into law without really having any law experience, that your PhD is all you really need to get into that field. Like, don't think you need to go to law school first if you just want to be a patent agent. Don't think that you need to take the patent bar first, because after having taken it, I know that that is a freakish thing to do before you have any experience and you have a law firm to pay for your training. So just know that you have all the skills built into you, and people expect to train you in the IP field. So do what you can to learn about it and show interest in it, but trust that you know a lot more than you think you do.
Thank you, Katherine. Yeah, and on that note, that is one of those bits of advice when people do reach out with advice on pursuing being a patent agent or law school and that sort of thing. Sitting for the patent bar is something you can do really at any time. It requires a Bachelor of Science, and so you can actually have that in your possession before you apply for your first job, and that could potentially be an advantage or a differentiator. And so that's definitely something you may want to be thinking about. Anyone else have any comments about getting that first position or overcoming any obstacles to getting into your profession? All right. So if not, I guess we'll kind of transition again in maybe kind of looking back, I guess, for those that have now been working in the field a little bit. I'm curious if you have any advice to yourself. We've talked a lot about being curious and taking opportunities. Are there any things that you look back on and wish that maybe you had done differently, or something that you would have, if you've given the opportunity again, you'd explore? Anyone want to take a stab at answering that one?
Sure. So I think I would double down on what I said before about branching out from your primary area of expertise. So, from the moment I started at Venable in DC, when I was a summer associate in 2011, that was the summer that the America Invents Act passed, which has reshaped patent law since. It's completely upended the entire industry. And so I had this heavy focus on patent litigation because that's where the need was. It aligned best with my background. And so I didn't do as much as I think I could have to seek other opportunities to gain experience with things like prosecution or tech transfer, or even, dabble in the soft IPs like copyright or trademark. Sometimes you can just get tunnel vision. It's so exciting. You're getting all this work. And then when you have a couple of years under your belt, that's what you know how to do. That's what you're good at. But then you find yourself being in-house counsel and having to answer questions about anything that could remotely relate to IP. And suddenly you wish you'd had a little bit more background in certain areas. So I think what I would have told myself would be, outline your priorities for your career, even if it's something like, what city do you want to be in? What industry do you want to be in? What aspects of your role are important to you? Do you want to stay in the lab? Do you want to write? Do you want to present? Do you want to teach? Which skills that you're trying to develop do you really want to use going forward? Because you really need to maintain some level of flexibility. I think it's easy to get focused on a particular shiny company that seems like it would be a dream to work for, or one particular path, when really there could be many different career paths that satisfy those priorities. But you really have to nail down first what's most important to you so that you can keep your eyes open and see those opportunities when they arise.
Thank you, Carly. Yeah, that is really, really great advice on this idea of, making sure that, you've equipped yourself really to be prepared for anything that, might come up and might be that next stepping stone in your career, but also I think recognizing and playing to your strengths in certain areas too. And that is, one thing about patent prosecution is that it can be, immensely, if you are introverted, it can be great because you do spend a lot of time writing and you spend a lot of time corresponding via writings with the patent office or with your clients and that sort of thing too. Katherine, do you have anything to add on this?
Sorry, I had that on mute. I guess looking back, I just want to tell my former self to calm down because I was so worried about being prepared, kind of like I alluded to before, when really you can just, do what you can and just, I don't know, go forth. But I think Carly's totally right about, while you're in grad school or while you're in any position in your life, take stock of the parts of it that you like and don't like, You're like, oh, I really like the days when I get to sit at my desk by myself and write my thesis. Let's have more of that. What job could I do where I have more of that? Which is, it's simple, but it's hard when you're caught up in the swirl of things to recognize sometimes. And talk to your lab mates about what you like and don't like, because sometimes like contrasting yourself with others and realizing like, oh, other people like doing experiments can be really revealing about what motivates you and what feels satisfying to you.
Yeah, thank you, Katherine. Those are really, really good points as well. And Jessica, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo what Carly and Katherine both said. Definitely 100% agree with all of it. I mean, I think for me, I would also agree, like I would tell myself, just like calm down and chill out. It's okay. Because I kind of had the opposite situation to Carly of, you know, like it's the shiny object. So you're just like going everywhere and you're chasing everything. And it's very easy to get burnt out that way, right? Because you're juggling so many things and you're, you know, looking here and you're looking there. And so I definitely would agree that really getting those priorities straight and really asking yourself like, okay, I have, you know, these two opportunities in addition to grad school, which obviously is a priority, right? So like which one, you can't do both, right? You can't spread yourself so thin over so many different things. So I would definitely agree kind of prioritizing and really saying like, okay, like what do I actually need versus what am I just kind of chasing?
Thank you. Yeah. And Zach, do you want to also add in?
Yeah, I would also, you know, the chill out advice is just so critical because, you know, I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to perform, to achieve certain arbitrary benchmarks that society has told us is important. And many of those things will come naturally over time with your own progression and success. So I think adding extra pressure to yourself to attain those is unnecessary. And, you know, when I look at my own career, I just wish I had somehow started earlier, I should say. But I think, you know, the path I went on allowed me to accumulate the skills that has put me where I am now. So yeah, the only thing that would have been better is sort of starting earlier and just taking more stock of myself, my talents, my curiosities, and my skills, you know, because self-awareness, I think, is the biggest asset you can have in finding the right role for you, not following the crowd. And, you know, because one minute anything with the word strategy in it will be hot, and the next minute anything with the term IP will be hot, and the next minute anything with real estate will be hot, right? Like there was a time when everybody wanted to be a realtor and get their, you know, real estate license, etc. So don't follow the crowd, follow opportunity, follow what fits your natural skills and interests, and things kind of just work out.
Yeah, that's put so well. I really appreciate all you weighing in on that because I do think that is one thing where you know, you'd hate to get caught up in second guessing the decisions you made, but at the same time, I think, you know, this is a perfect topic or question to have in this panel because I think, you know, it's really, I think, highlighting to those in attendance, hopefully, that, you know, there are, I guess, opportunities available and resources that you can at least start to kind of understand what careers outside of the lab might look like, you know, careers in venture and law and IP. And so now is the time to, you know, take those opportunities to, you know, kind of take stock of what your interests are, what your skills are, where you might see yourself in 5, 10, 15 years. But it's just great advice too, in terms of, you know, calm down and really, you know, if to the extent that you can, you know, start early, because I do think, you know, we are in that age where I think everyone is seemingly hyper competitive. So I think, you know, the more you can do to differentiate yourself earlier, the better. So, you know, with that, we had reserved a few minutes for questions from the audience. I don't see any coming in through the chat. So Perhaps, if any of the panelists have any kind of closing thoughts or remarks that they'd like to share. If not, I think this has been, a really thought-provoking and useful discussion.
I will say one more thing. I think, having been an early career professional and now a mid-career professional, hearing what we've all shared, remembering where I was, however many years ago, like a lot of things sound cliche and typical and et cetera, right? But all these things are extremely true, right? You really do have to know yourself. You really should not put too much pressure on yourself to, get a certain title or make a certain amount, because many of these things will happen naturally and organically over time. And you should really just kind of take stock of what it is you do well, what you like, but then be very sort of forthright in following that curiosity and going for it, right? Don't talk yourself out of opportunity. And I know that's something that, a lot of people have imposter syndrome, but that's the part you should put aside and just go. And if it doesn't work out, fine. You switch, you pivot to something else. That's what I would close with.
Terrific. Thank you, Zach. Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going off of that, I mean, I definitely would say some of the things kind of that I thought I wanted, right? It was like, oh yeah, like this opportunity, this is what I want, this is what I need. And either it was something that I didn't get and I had the opportunity to pivot, or it was something that I did get and I was like, whoa, this is not what I wanted at all, or not what I expected. And oftentimes it has been the things that kind of took me by surprise, right? Of like, I wasn't expecting it, didn't ask for it, didn't anything. And it just kind of appeared and it was like, oh, okay, do I pursue or do I not? And those have been the things that in pursuing them have been sort of the most rewarding. And I think one thing I would say, just for those in the audience that are current graduate students and still have a little bit of time before they graduate, my first year, actually my first summer, I was able to take part in the mortgage entrepreneurial boot camp, which Katherine mentioned at the very beginning. And that kind of jump-started me on this path of looking outside the academy and looking at entrepreneurship and intellectual property and all of those kinds of things. So if you have an interest, even if you don't have an interest, the things that you learn could be useful if you do end up going to the academy trying to be a professor and stuff. But it's been very valuable.
Thank you, Jessica. Carly?
Yeah, so I think one perspective I'll add is that I'm about a decade into my career. I graduated law school in 2012. And one thing that you don't really think about when you're coming out of school is you feel like that first opportunity is the thing that you need, like the final goal, the finish line. And the thing is, the things that you want and you're interested in and your goals are going to change throughout your career. It's going to be a moving target. And so something that suited you when you're 25 or 30 is not necessarily going to be the thing that you want forever. I was so excited to come out of law school, work for a big firm in DC. I worked so much that all of my friends were at my firm. My husband I met through my firm. And it was what I wanted at the time. I wanted to work hard and feel really important in that role. And, now it's not the same thing that I would want now. And so continuing to reevaluate, it's not a one-time shot. I think you're going to keep evaluating throughout the course of your career, and opportunities that didn't look that attractive before or looked very attractive might flip-flop over the years. So it is just like Zach was saying, like, have that self-awareness and continue to have it throughout the course of your career.
Thank you, Carly. And last but not least, Katherine.
I'll just echo what Carly said. I think it's so important not to put the decision coming out of grad school of what you're going to be on a pedestal, because it just causes people to freeze and people to stress, and it can change. And a lot of people do postdocs and end up doing something completely different and not going into academia, and it'll work out. Just take stock in everything you do about what's good about it, what's bad about it. Try to just learn from every experience, and then it's never a waste.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks again, everyone. This has just been a really fun conversation for me. And like you said, Zach and Carly, as you kind of enter the 10th and 15th year of your career, it's fun to look back. And Jessica and Katherine, I'm excited to have you guys just embarking on yours. And thanks again for all your thoughtful comments and dialogue. It was really a pleasure, and I hope the audience found this to be very useful. And I mean, there were just a few nice nuggets and buzzwords that came out. Start early, stay curious, calm down, don't put your career on a pedestal, all kinds of fun stuff. So hopefully there was something for everyone. And don't be afraid to reach out if you have any follow-up questions or would like to talk more. And thanks again, and have a great night.